when you think of mindfulness, like traditionally people might think that's like the opposite of willpower, right? Because you're in the moment, you're just sitting there, you're, being all non-judgmental and accepting. So how could you ever, reach your goals when you're doing that all day? But then from my own experience, I was like, wait, something weird happens when you are in the moment, though, when you do all this yoga and when you feel into your body, that you sort of realize what is true to you and you start pursuing that. And the energy sort of comes by itself and you get into this kind of flow state.
Welcome to Magic in the Moment, Mindfulness in Real Time. My name is Clayton Platt, and I'll be your host for this podcast journey. Now, for many people, practicing mindfulness has very little to do with sitting on a cushion, lighting incense, or even focusing on their breath. Just paying attention to what they're doing at any moment. And doing this intentionally can create that same magic. Our time together is intended to share how mindfulness plays out in everyday life for our guests. Now, before we begin, here's a word from our sponsor, Meditation for Leadership. We all feel it, the pressure to keep up, to perform, to push through. But lasting success doesn't come from speeding up. It comes from slowing down, leaning in, and creating the space to lead from within. That space is where we shift from autopilot to intention, building mindful habits that strengthen focus and calm. It's where we stay connected to our values and purpose, choosing to respond instead of react. It's where we unlock our potential to positively shape our own lives and empower others to grow and thrive. That's the work of Meditation for Leadership. If you're ready to create the space for sustainable success, visit meditationforleadership.org. Welcome to Magic in the Moment, Mindfulness in Real Time. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Vera Ludwig, who occupies a unique space in the mindfulness world. As both a psychologist and neuroscientist at the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center, Vera doesn't just study well-being. She measures it, maps it, and most importantly, makes it accessible. Her groundbreaking research on self-regulation without force might just revolutionize how we think about behavior change. She's shown us that awareness alone, without the exhausting willpower battles, can actually rewire our habits. Vera, welcome to Magic in the Moment.
Thank you so much, Clayton. What a lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here today.
Well, I am thrilled to have you. And I want to, if we can, let's just start right there with that idea of self-regulation. I know that in talking to you in the past, that this was kind of an interesting part of your journey, so to speak. And I'd like us, if we can, let's just start right there. How does this play out in your life, and how does it bring us to where we are right now?
Sure. So this topic of willpower has always fascinated me. And I guess I was, especially when I was studying, etc., I was working really, really hard. I was definitely pushing myself a lot to do everything as well as I could, etc. Not necessarily in school, but definitely later when I was studying in Amsterdam, Edinburgh. And I then did my PhD also on the topic of willpower, self-control. So we did some neuroimaging studies on, what happens in the brain when we exert self-control. We also had a big project on basically measuring self-control and willpower that my colleague Rosa Steinke led. And so that was always a fascination of mine. But then there was this point where I was, when I was noticing that this type of living is not really necessarily something that makes you happy on the long term, right? If it's just, you go from goal to goal, you're always in this stressful state of forcing yourself, of being scared of, not getting enough things done. And so I guess I was longing for a different way of living deep down. And so after I finished my PhD, I discovered yoga and meditation, and I spent a lot of time, doing that, probably pouring a lot of willpower into that. Just practicing a lot, meditating a lot. And at some point, I probably noticed that the same thing was happening there as in my normal life, that I was overdoing it to some extent. That's just how I am, I guess. But mm, well, I guess at some point I realized there's a different type of willpower. I discovered it after it sort of burned out a little bit, and I was at a point of my life where I wasn't really sure what would come next after my PhD. And after going into this meditation and yoga world, and what I did to kind of pull myself out of that deep um, place that I was in, I had the opportunity to live on an island in Germany for a while because my friend happened to open like a coffee shop there. I was a manager there and was looking for someone to help. So it was like, whatever, I could just try doing that. And what happened on this island was sort of magical because how can I say this? I was pulled into this flow experience that I somehow started to teach yoga there. And then I started to give workshops on, neuroscience of behavior change, neuroscience of emotional regulation, figuring out, what is true to you and those sorts of things. And it was just all happening so effortlessly, like in a way that I had never experienced in my academic life. So I saw myself like creating all these posters. They were all over the island. I was doing marketing, all these things. And it worked, people loved it. And that was the moment when I was starting to wonder what how do mindfulness and willpower relate to each other, I guess. So because when you think of mindfulness, like traditionally people might think that's like the opposite of willpower, right? Because you're in the moment, you're just sitting there, you're, being all non-judgmental and accepting. So how could you ever, reach your goals when you're doing that all day? But then from my own experience, I was like, wait, something weird happens when you are in the moment, though, when you do all this yoga and when you feel into your body, that you sort of realize what is true to you and you start pursuing that. And the energy sort of comes by itself and you get into this kind of flow state. Does that make any sense?
Well,
So,
it does. It actually does. And a couple of things come to my mind hearing that. One is that the sense of, first of all, getting centered around where you're headed,
yeah.
right? And sometimes connecting with your body to know, sort of listening to your body, what are the messages that your body's telling you about this journey, and trusting it, right? Because
Yeah.
we get so wrapped up into going into our story, and the story tells us you got to work harder, you're going to fail, all those things, the mind chatter. And the body can tell us, well, wait a minute. It's like, I've done this before, or I'm comfortable with this, and sort of trusting that. Is that sort of jive with what you're saying?
Yes, I think yeah, exactly. I think one of the ways in which mindfulness helps willpower is that we just gotta like we become aware of what is no longer aligned in our life and what might be better aligned, right? Because like if we notice we have to keep pushing ourselves, it just doesn't feel good anymore, then maybe at some point you realize that is not actually what I'm supposed to be doing or what is most me or how I can bring most value into the world. And I think that's one of the ways in which it plays out.
Yeah. And I think it was occurring to me, again, you're talking about this, the thought that where does like sitting quietly get you to your goals?
Right.
And one of the things that occurred to me when you're saying that was, well, how do you really know where your goal is unless you reflect? And when we reflect, in order to get the messages of what we truly need,
Mhm.
how we are deeply aligned, we have to kind of wade through the noise and really tune into what is in fact important.
Yeah.
And so those messages tend to be somatic in many respects, don't they? So that's where I was connecting those dots.
Yeah. Exactly. And then the other way is then to overcome sort of the obstacles that are in the way of actually doing what you really want to do and what is really authentic to you. I think that's the next one, because oftentimes the things that we feel most called to do are also really, really scary to us. And we have like all kinds of inner resistance against it and fears, etc. It needs a lot of courage. And so if we're able to be mindful with ourselves, and not just mindful, but self-compassionate and kind with ourselves, we can gradually go through all these inner obstacles and, work through them, and then get ready to do what maybe is
Yeah.
best for the world and ourselves.
Well, yeah, sure. And so and it's interesting because I'm not sure when we were talking previously that I had kind of focused in on that experience that you had like on the island. I knew a little bit, I know about your research and some of the experience, but that sense of saying, look, I'm doing this study, I've done all this work and I'm feeling resistance, right? I'm feeling, it's like, it's not just challenge, because I think life is challenge, right? So we know that, the obstacles, the path, and all that good stuff. No mud, no lotus, as
All
Chip
right.
Mackin would say. Fine. Sometimes if we're getting this friction, that friction is telling us a story of like, you're putting a lot of effort into something that isn't gratifying, fulfilling,
Yeah.
and taking that moment just to kind of quiet and say, okay, well, what does fulfill me? And then
Mhm.
starting to move in that direction. And then if you're in that direction, it sounds like if you're putting your energy in a way that is connecting with your North Star, so to speak, it becomes less effortful.
Yes.
And that plays into the flow I think you were talking about.
Yes, that's my experience, and also what we later did research on. So yeah, it's like almost the energy comes from self. Because like, right, if you talk about something that you're really passionate about, for example, you see it in people's eyes, they light up, there's this some energy. And that is the energy you can use to then, do things, create things with that energy that actually appear in the real world, so to speak. And it also, like, this energy attracts the help of other people, in my experience, right? So when you are in this authentic state, all people want to help you. And then, like, here, we're up this room to give this, to a workshop there. How can I support you? Can I, it's just things sort of happen when you're there, in my experience. And yeah, so I got fascinated with it. And a little bit later, I think I discovered Judson Brewer's book, The Craving Mind, I believe is the title. I don't know, that was probably 2 or 3 years later, even when I was already back on the mainland and back in science a little bit. And I read this book and I was like, oh my gosh, he's talking about the exact same thing. I was like, right, this other type of willpower and self-regulation of behavior change that is effortless, or almost effortless. Doesn't mean there's no challenge or there's no difficulty, but it's like almost a whole new world of behavior, of living, of being productive. And so I reached out to him, and he invited me over for a talk, and we were like, wow, like, we really think alike. We should do something together. And he ended up hiring me for a while, and I'm super grateful for this opportunity. I had an amazing time working with him on this topic of self-regulation and mindfulness. And we wrote a paper together with Kirk Warren Brown, who's one of the self-determination theory experts from original developers. Yeah.
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 And I think you may remember when we first connected, we were talking about Ted Brewer. And one of the things that I loved, the way the universe works, was
Yeah.
that he was one of the teachers in the mindfulness meditation teacher certification course that I went through, the 2-year course led by Jack Cornfield and Tara Rock. And
Mhm.
when I think back about how well constructed that 2-year program was, and tying in with these experts with very disparate topics. But that craving mind from Judd Brewer spoke deeply to me as someone who is a self-professed compulsive human being. And my personal journey has been filled with coming to terms with compulsions that I've needed to recognize and understand. It's like, how do we move away from a compulsion to have that extra drink or whatever it could be? And I found his work and our conversation around that to be really reinforcing. And if I may, recently, I think that subconsciously I practiced that. So about a couple of months ago, I recognized that every night after dinner, at some point, 10, 15, 20 minutes, I would have a craving for dessert. And I'd head to the freezer to get Talenti or ice cream or the cookie jar or whatever every night. And I wasn't massively overweight. I was overweight. Just feeling that.
Yeah.
And not saying, I need to lose weight. I didn't. I wasn't thinking I needed to lose weight. But I felt that sensation. And I was, what is this sensation telling me? Yeah, it wants something sweet, but there's some need that doesn't have to be answered by this.
Right.
And I made a substitution of something like a wintergreen lifesaver. So stupid. But it made all the difference in the world.
Right. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
That was a moment of flow in a way, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so maybe so that people get some context on what exactly this idea is, right? And so basically the idea is that if we bring awareness to our behaviors and their consequences, that our brain kind of automatically rewires, you could say, right? So the traditional approach to willpower is like, oh, I shouldn't eat I think you said cookies, right? The cookies, like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm such a bad person for eating all these cookies. I should stop. And ironically, unfortunately, that often increases the behaviors because then you feel sort of shame, you feel bad because you've again eaten these cookies, and that actually makes you more likely to eat them again. And then there's some people like Angela Duckworth, who's obviously one of the big experts on willpower as well. And she says, okay, the best way is just to avoid any temptation. So she would probably tell you, just don't buy the cookies, just don't have them there. That's the most effective way of not acting on it. And that's definitely also good advice. But we can't always do that in our lives, right? Maybe other people in our family buy the cookies. Okay, we can't always avoid temptations. And so the idea of this framework that we wrote this paper upon, like based on earlier ideas by Judd as well and Kirk, is that if you become really, really aware of how, the trigger that made you, for example, eat the cookies, like in your case, you realize, oh, there's actually a need that I have. Maybe I'm a bit stressed, or maybe I need some affection, or some relaxation, whatever it is. You could become aware of this trigger of your need, or you could become aware of how that behavior actually makes you feel. And so maybe after you eat the cookies, maybe there's a small moment of you really enjoying it. But overall, a few minutes later, if you really sense into your body, maybe it doesn't actually feel that great. Maybe it feels a bit sluggish, or, it's a strange kind of feeling sometimes. And I'm not saying you can never eat cookies or whatever, right? We don't want to try to any extreme. That's not what it's about. Quite to the contrary. If you feel like, oh, this is feeling good to me, then why not repeat that behavior? There's no reason to stop if you're enjoying it, I guess, and it feels good in your body. But that's exactly the point. You might realize, like doing this sort of compulsively or automatically all the time when I'm stressed, that actually does not feel good, right? And the idea that we present in this paper, and that Judd has presented before as well, is that sort of your brain will sort of relearn if you're really aware. And that's what he observed in his practice, like clinical practice as well. And when people really feel into their behavior consequences, that can change how attracted they are to that behavior. And then, yeah, if you're less attracted to the behavior, you're less likely to do it, and it's less effortful because you don't
Yeah.
want.
And just to kind of again kind of reinforce that in real life, when I became aware of the fact that, oh, I'm losing weight and I'm not working hard to lose weight, it happened when I wasn't actually doing a lot of exercise, right?
Right,
And I would break, and I feel better. And then
right,
at that time, then when normally speaking, the dessert compulsion would come up, I would feel this like, you know what? You're changing some behavior and you feel better for it. So that
yeah,
became the reinforcement. It's like, I don't need it. I don't need it. It's
right,
like, it doesn't make me a bad person when I do it. Right. But right now it's like, So thinking about that, what was there could be some aspect, and I don't want to make this a psychological session about me, but there could be some aspect of my daily life where I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And that
yeah,
compulsion at some point, as it was manifesting itself after dinner, was that,
yeah,
okay, oh, good. Now there's my reward. And it's like,
right,
but it didn't have, as you said, it didn't have the overall benefit that one would want. It was that momentary, and actually it was causing a little bit more harm. So then switching back to say, okay, one, can I connect this new behavior with an outcome which feels good in reinforcement? And also being more mindful during the day. Oh, okay. Where are these moments of fulfillment, right? That
yeah,
you talked before, and I loved it. It's like those things that make you light up, right?
yeah,
So potentially there were not enough moments for me to plug into my currency. What was it that made my life feel really good in that moment?
mhm,
Because those things then are reinforcing um,
mhm.
your reason for being, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. That is a good example. Mm. Yeah, and actually, we did a real study on that as well, where we had people sort of feel into after they ate, like when they had a craving to eat something that they didn't really want to eat from a long-term perspective. We had them sort of predict how much they were probably going to eat and how they would probably feel. And then if they still wanted to eat it, they could do that and sort of enjoy, be in the moment, and have the experience. And then we asked them again later in the app, like how do you feel right now? It's just app for mindful eating. And so yeah, and we found that the expected value of the behavior decreased over time. So people were still doing the behavior, but they found it less attractive over time. Um, yeah. So that was sort of some scientific evidence that this is actually happening. And, something is changing in the brain. And then to your point about really discovering what is fulfilling to you and like discovering new behaviors, that's another part of the model we published, that at some point you can try new behaviors. Like maybe, I'm not sure what exactly you did as a substitute, but could go for a walk, could get a hug from someone, whatever it is, cuddle with the dog or something. Um,
I will for so.
and then I'm like, see, how does that make me feel? And it sounds like that's sort of what you did. You became healthier. I think you said you exercise more. Did you
Actually,
or
I ended up exercising more, but it was more like at that moment, I just substitute like a wintergreen, lifesaver, which just was like,
yeah,
okay, you're reaching for something. And it's like, okay. But I let that taste remind me
yeah,
like, oh, you've made a choice, right? Your go-to would be dark chocolate, right? But you find it hard not to have two or three dark chocolates instead of one.
right,
So this is a reminder, that taste is a reminder that you've made a change. You got something a little sweet and it's not, and then, maybe it's also at the same time reminding myself that, during the course of the day, I'm plugging into more of those moments where I feel energized. And
Mhm.
like, you know, when I'm doing something that feels reinforcing and life fulfilling, that like take that moment to recognize that, right?
Yeah.
What is it that lit me up, right? And try to find more moments of those and fewer
Right.
moments where you're just, plugging through. Some part of life is plugging through it. There's no doubt about it. We got to do it, right? A
Right.
wise man once said, if about 65 to 70% of your day should be something that feels good and reinforcing and filling, and 25 to 30% of the day, maybe 35% of the day is drudgery. That's okay. That's a balance we can deal with. If it's too much out of balance, we need to make some changes. And if we can, I want to go into more of that subject of the flow and
Yeah.
kind of where sort of maybe for you personally, but also sort of academically or professionally, you see this playing out in lives and how it sort of manifests itself, to sort of reinforce like, yeah, effortless effort is a sign of, you know, being in the right place at the right time, so to speak, in the right mindset.
Yeah. How does that play out? I mean, I think a lot about this whole home office culture at the moment. Um, I'm not exactly sure what other people experience, but I think some people go really well with it, others don't. But there's a little bit this idea of, okay, you got to sit at your desk at 8 or 9, and you have this ideal in your head, and now you have to work until I don't know how long, 6, 7, whatever people think, and we almost in this whole work culture a little bit, we treat ourselves almost like machines, and we expect ourselves to be always on and always focused. And I guess especially as a female, I know that we have cycles in our biology. Yeah, I obviously, yeah, as a female, experience that a lot. There's days when I'm much less productive and others where I'm very productive. And that's natural rhythm of my body. And, other, men have that as well to some extent. We have good days, we have bad days. And if we just always try to keep pushing through, we're going against our biology, actually. That's not how our bodies work. Um, and so I think one key element here is to be really kind with ourselves and go a little bit more with nature, with the energy, rather than having this mindset of this is how we have to work, and that feeling bad when it doesn't work out and like judging ourselves. Oh, today I again only work 4 hours and I want you to work 10, and what's happening? And instead, like being understanding with ourselves, maybe going for a walk, like Michael Platt, always points that out too. Even a little walk can really reset your brain, make you more creative. It's actually going to increase your productivity. Or connecting with colleagues, maybe do the effort of going into the office again and seeing your colleagues and having these inspirational moments and really synchronizing with others, and you know um, instead of just staring at a screen. So that's something I'm thinking about. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I was just thinking about that. You're talking about everybody has their own rhythm,
Mhm.
right? Their own cycles. And back in the day, traditionally, where everybody went to an office or
Mhm.
in the workplace, it doesn't not necessarily your office, but they fit into a schedule that their organization had set up. And honestly, I understand that. It's like there's a need to have some structure. There's no doubt about it. On the other hand, recognizing where we personally are most productive, most creative, where we get into those moments where doing what we're doing feels less like drudgery, less like a job, and more like, this is me doing what I like to do. This is me doing me. And if we're lucky enough to have that part of our job description, um,
Right.
recognizing that and saying, okay, at these points of the day, typically, I I go into this easily. Whereas if I'm trying to do statistical work at, early in the morning, it drives me crazy. Or if I'm doing, trying to be creative late in the afternoon when personally my body and my, cycle is like, winding down. That may not be a great time for that. Maybe that's a good time for me just to do something that was a little less quote unquote creative or mindful and more like, okay, I'm just plugging numbers in, right? I'm doing something that needs to be done that, doesn't take a lot of creativity, but plugging into that. And there's a mindful element to that, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Becoming aware of all of these inner cycles and processes. And I totally agree about, some structure is obviously helpful. And that's always like finding the balance, right? Between the pushing and of course, sometimes we have to push ourselves. We have to get started. Like for me, getting started is always the hardest thing. Like really sitting down, opening that document and, doing the thing. And we still have to do it sometimes to get into the flow. And another thing I want to briefly acknowledge, of course, as we talk here, is that now we're talking for a specific part of the population who even has the privilege to kind of make their own plan for the day, etc. There's, of course, many, many people who don't have that choice at all and who are just sort of forced from the outside to work in certain ways. And so I just want to acknowledge that as we speak. Um, yeah, that might not actually have this choice
Yeah.
that we're just.
I totally get that. And it's so important to recognize. I mean, there's a privilege that comes along with being able to set your own schedule. And
Mm,
I think most people enjoy that.
mhm.
So one, as someone who's been freelance for quite a number of years, I set my own schedule and I also have issues with that, but you know,
Oh, yeah.
uh, but let's think about those people for whom there is a schedule that is, I don't want to say imposed upon them, but it's part of their job description. They need to either show up at the office or maybe they're working remotely, but they need to be available for meetings, blah, 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 blah. And
Right.
tuning into ways that can allow them to fit into that schedule as best they can, because that's necessary. But at the same time, not diminishing their connection with what works for them purposely and finding ways to support what is uniquely them in a schedule which is not unique to them,
Right.
right? And that can be difficult. Also, I think it speaks to uh, the need for leaders and managers when they can to be conscious of read the room, right?
Mhm.
You've got a disparate group of people reporting to you, working on whatever they may be working on. And can you tune into ways that allow the individuals to flourish in those moments when they are naturally flourishing? And that's not
Yeah.
easy, but I think it can happen.
Yeah, maybe like paying attention to what, in what moments do my employees light up? When do they get this energy? And instead of treating everyone like, you have to do this and you have to do that, like let them follow their passion to some extent, as far as possible, and their strengths. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love that.
So I want to kind of get back to sort of some of the stuff that was integral with your personal journey. And one of the things I remember talking to you about was the sense of connection.
Hmm.
Uh, and that to me is such a really important concept in life. It's, I think right now, it's, it's more important than ever for people to recognize how divisive. I mean, we know you got to be living in a cave not to recognize the divisiveness of our world, not just in the United States, but that's clearly, for me, front and center, but also just recognizing how the importance of finding those connections, finding ways to find uh, points of mutual interest, uh, things that rather than divide us, bring us together. And you've seen that in real life, and you've also seen that in research.
Right. Yeah. That is exactly like what was my next step on my journey was to go to Philadelphia, and then I worked with Dr. Michael Platt for a few years, and we did this research on deep authentic connection with some business applications, but also in general and in other contexts. And I totally agree with you. I think it's so relevant right now. The US is so divided right now, and not just the US. And I think partly, based on how the internet works and everyone living in their own little bubbles of their own reality, so to speak, of what they believe is true. And so, well, one study I think that is very relevant to potentially address this issue is that we did a study on the so-called just like me meditation, as I've mentioned to you. So it's a meditation where two people just look into each other's eyes and they contemplate sentences, like, for example, just like me, this person has felt loneliness, sadness, and pain. Or just like me, this person just wants to get their needs met, or they want to be loved, or you know. I experienced that myself like a long time ago in a workshop, and I was so touched. I looked at the, the eyes of a stranger, and I was like, wow, wow, I see this full human being in front of me. And I think we always think that we do that, but really our brain has this way of always labeling things and categorizing things, right? And saying, okay, this is a Republican, this is a Democrat, this is an old person, this is a young person, this is a Jew, this is a Muslim, and we look through these filters, and that's just how the brain works in a way, or the ego, as they would say in the spiritual traditions side. But then what if you step out of that and try to really connect to this human being in front of you and realize they are very similar to you in so many ways? And so in the study, we found that when people did that, both in person or virtually, they felt a lot closer to the other person. They also perceived the other person as warmer, they saw more potential for a real friendship with that person. Sometimes it increased attractiveness if it's opposite sex. But yeah, it just made you see the other person in a much more positive light. It also made people express more generosity, or at least intentions to be generous and share their resources more generously with the other person. And then very interestingly, we also found synchrony. So when people did that, look into each other's eyes and contemplate these sentences, just like me, we saw some synchrony in heart rates emerging between the two people when they did it in person. And that didn't happen when they were just sitting next to each other with their eyes closed. And so that might be like a mechanism that happens in those moments, like the interpersonal synchrony between people. Yeah, and if you ask me, I think this is sort of the medicine the world needs right now, just like me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love, to me, this takes me back again to teaching that was offered to me during my certification program. And it was Jack Kornfield wrote extensively on that, and introduced the Just Like Me meditation. When he was talking about it, it was more in a sort of a group area where it was a deep meditation. But the thing that I love that you were bringing up, and it does recall my conversation with Dr. Platt, was that sense of the synchronicity, but looking at someone directly in the eyes and showing it just with that person. And if I'm not mistaken, so you're talking about actually verbalizing, right? So if you and I were, rather than me kind of trying to describe it, why don't you just kind of build that a little bit more so that we get a truer sense of it?
So in this particular meditation, there's no verbalization. It's so the way I first encountered it from my teacher, Miranda de Wilde, and she basically read out the sentences. So he had us stand in front of a stranger in the room, and then he read out, just like me. And we were looking into each other's eyes for, I don't know how long he did it, 1 or 2 minutes. And in our study, we did it similarly. So they actually read the sentences and they were asked to contemplate them. So they, in this particular dyadic meditation meaning a meditation between two people, they did not say anything. But there's other versions where people do.
Right. No, I get that. get that. The key
Uh,
is that, again, this was offered externally, but
oh
then
yeah,
you
yeah.
were asked to reflect on it, to absorb that, and to be, in essence, thinking about that, if you will, reflecting on that as you looked into the eyes of this individual. So you could do
Mhm.
that, for example, in a silent meditation where you're being guided and you're closing your eyes. But in this, the dyadic part of it was you're looking at someone so that there is
Yes,
a human being with
yes.
whom you probably had no connection before.
Mhm.
And in this moment, few minutes, whatever, there begins to emerge an actual connection.
Right.
And as you mentioned, it begins to affect your acceptance of this person.
Mm.
They could be, a different race. They could be a different religion. They could, you could know ahead of time a different politic, political party, whatever. But just going through that, looking into their eyes and reflecting on, just like me, you're breaking down barriers. You
Mhm.
are you're removing the out group, right? Because
Mhm.
that's something, again, from a neuroscience standpoint, right? We know we're tribal. This is how we kind of survived in the savannah when we weren't the fastest or strongest of the species. We had to group together, and then we had
Mhm.
to trust these groups, right? So that's right. That's how we're wired. But does that sense of trust and creation of in groups isn't always mm, isn't always effective, isn't always positive, and often is, as I think you're referring to these days, is influenced by the internet, social media. Just culturally, that's happened all the time. But our ability to break that down and say,
Right.
we're human, right?
Yep.
We have this in common.
Yep. Right. And I think very important to point out here is that this doesn't mean you accept everything this person does or say, or that, right, that you need to accept, like, have the same beliefs or perspectives. And you can still have your boundaries and say this or that is not okay with me. Um, but that coming from a place of connection and really seeing the other person. And like Byron Katie, you probably familiar with, like I'm a big fan of hers. She always says, if you believed what this person believed, you would do the exact same thing. You would vote for the same people. You would, do the same things. And I find that very fascinating because if you would, were grown up in the same environment as this person, you had the same peer group, the same influences, you would watch the same videos on Instagram, you know, try holding on to, to your beliefs that you have right now. I think that's very humbling to feel into that. And again,
Yeah.
not to make excuses for like bad things or, but just to have some understanding for each other. And then maybe just maybe we can solve the problems of the world together instead of against each other.
Little by little, and it takes these little steps, and it takes the individuals, right? It takes us practicing this on our own, um, and that, I think there can be this ripple effect, right? If
Mhm.
I'm willing to do this, if I'm willing to look at the neighbor across the street who may have a yard sign during an election that conflicts with my views, but I'm like, well, just like me, they walk their dog, right? You know, they go to the same grocery store I do, so they're eating, you know,
Authentic.
you know, and we may not watch the same news feeds, but we are watching the same streaming shows.
Hearing.
Just like me, they grew up watching Friends or whatever. So I love that. I love that. And I want to get back then for you and your journey, right? How kind of these concepts manifested. You talk about I love, for example, you did all this hard work and then you said, I need to take a break. I need to kind of, you went to the island and then you discovered through this the sense of flow and the sense of being in the moment. Okay, where's this taking me? And you seem to be open to the guidance of the universe, if you will. Say, okay,
Right.
now, and you end up, and you read Justin's book and you went to work with him, right? And then
Mhm.
you came to Philadelphia, and you're kind of drawn to work with Dr. Michael Blatt, and then so where it's drawing you now, where in this process, where is this sense of letting your inner North Star guide you and you tuning into this? Where is this taking you at this moment?
I love this question. And yeah, I guess already at the time when I worked with Jed, I already felt this inner, I could almost say calling. I had this feeling that what I really want to do is study the connection of sexuality and well-being, because I saw that there's like a big gap there in the literature and science and in society in general, that we don't talk enough about, the positive aspects of sexuality. And, there's so much about the negative, and and that's really important to address and to prevent negative things from happening or dealing with them if they happen. But, there's also a lot to like the positive, how sex can help us connect with our partner, for example, and have a more fulfilling, meaningful life. Or just not just having sex, but the whole relationship to our sexuality, to our body, to our choices. Maybe the choice not to ever have sex, that's also valid. And then we have to find our meaning around that in our lives. It's just such a central area of life in one way or the other for many people, even if they never want to have sex, they're not interested in it. Even then, like I said, they have to make sense of it or deal with their emotions around the topic. And so that was the thing that really called me for a long, 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 long time. And especially I did meditations around, where will my path take me next? And it kept almost appearing in front of me, like, this is what you should do. It sounds a little strange, but it really felt like that. Kept calling me, this is it, for the next step at least. And yeah, and I resisted it for a long time because I was so scared. I was like, what are people going to think of me with this topic as a woman talking about it openly, reputation, career. People told me, you'll never get money for this, this is like, to keep your fingers off that, don't talk about it in public. And I was like, great, I know it's so important. And finally, I realized I'm never going to be happy if I don't listen to this inner calling. And I wrote a big grant, and I actually, got a lot of money actually to do to work on this. I'm really grateful for that. And I'm now able to have a big team, and we keep getting more because people get attracted to it. Then people reach out to me and they want to help, they want to work with us. And I feel like something big is happening, like amongst a lot of us interested in this topic. So that's sort of where I am now. And I'm now the director of the Human Sexuality and Wellbeing Project at the Positive Psychology Center, focusing on this topic specifically.
Well, it's interesting because when you and I were talking before, and we're saying, how much do we go into this conversation on the podcast? And it's like, he said, let's see. And honestly, I'm going to tell you that I think I saw the energy when that subject came up. Your eyes just started beaming. I could feel the sense of, this is something that is meaningful to you, right? So we're not going to skirt over it, right? And I think, quite honestly, that's one of the problems that undoubtedly has existed, in our culture, is that, this is like a taboo. And when you don't talk about it and you don't allow yourself to gently think about it in a positive way,
Yeah.
and then it becomes something that is ignored, and, then takes this secondary, tertiary, like it's just not part of our consciousness, and therefore doesn't play an impactful, positive part of our lives.
Right.
So I'd love to know, as you're continuing these studies, what are some of the things that are, that are arising in the studies, and, whether or not this plays into mindfulness, I don't care.
Wow. Yeah. we've been doing a lot already. We have surveyed 5,000 people across the US on what they're longing for, what they're missing in their sex lives. We have talked to many diverse people across the political spectrum, across, ages, genders, etc. And it's so beautiful to, hear people's responses, and it really confirms my feeling that it's really important to study this. Um, People talk actually a lot about connection and relationships when I start talking about sex with them. A lot of it is really about love at the end of the day. Authenticity, self-expression, being able to be yourself, agency, like the ability to say no to things you don't want and yes to things you do want. Mm, And many people also mention how it's important how, it integrates in their overall life. Like when I talk to people who say they already in a good place in that regard, it's often about, it's not just this compartmentalized thing that I'm ashamed of, but I sort of came to accept that this is a part of me, living in this body. Because like you say, we're pushing it away, but if we're mindful of ourselves, I'm sure many people who have done meditation, they experience sexual desires during the meditation. Sometimes these things come up, but we often don't dare to say that. Raise our hand in the meditation class. Well, I was, having all these sexual thoughts during this class, or what should I do? So, but it is part of being human, and to just accept that, I think, can be so healing. And it doesn't mean going into the world and having a bunch of sex with a bunch of people. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's about fully accepting that that is a part of us as humans, and that we have to find a way to integrate it in healthy ways without harming relationships, maybe even, fostering them in beautiful ways.
You know, the word that was coming to my mind, and I was trying to suppress this word, not because I didn't want to deal with it, but because I wanted to keep my focus on what you were saying.
Right.
Right? I wanted to be in the moment and truly hear. But the word that kept coming up was repression and
Yep.
suppression, right? And all of a sudden I saw this parallel that I think can be helpful for people. Okay, so there's taboo about talking about sex. Okay, great. Well, we're opening that door, so let's understand that. But let's think about what we eat, right? So we have desires. Well, I was talking before about my desires for sweet and sweet tea, right? But let's just talk about when you get hungry, right? Recognizing there's a hunger, and there are different ways to satisfy this hunger. And I started thinking, wow, I bet that plays into, we have sexual needs, we have sexual hunger, and being mindful that this is arising, and then being honest about what are positive ways to fulfill that, right? And yeah, so does that make sense? Am I touching on
Yeah.
something that resonates?
And I guess that's where it ties back to the self-regulation piece, right? And I recently discovered that my close collaborator, Ari Lewis, who is also at the forefront of the sexuality and well-being topic, he wrote a chapter on this sort of sexuality and how we can become compassionately aware of our behaviors and thoughts. In the case for compulsive sexual behaviors, for example, to just recognize how certain behaviors make us feel. Like maybe if someone, repeatedly uses porn like a lot every day and doesn't feel good about that anymore, or, has certain harmful behaviors with other people that they know are not good for that person, etc. That also there, this type of self-regulation approach, this mindfulness approach could potentially bring some healing. So to really feel, so what he does with his patients is like he asks when they're about to act on these impulses, he sort of asks them to feel into like how that's gonna play out, how they're probably going to feel like in the moment they do it, the moment right after, and maybe the next day, and maybe a week later. Um, so that frame, so I think that plays into what you were saying, to apply this mindfulness and being mindful of the triggers, of the behaviors, and of the outcomes, also in the sexual domain. Right.
Yeah. And along those lines, I was just thinking about, again, not just because I think it makes a useful sort of place setting, is if we're thinking about, food habits and sexual habits or whatever the subject, thinking about, so, you have a partner, and how do you decide what you're going to have for dinner? And what
Mhm.
role do you play in that dinner? And how
Mhm.
satisfying uh, is that, exercise, so to speak, of either preparing, eating, cleaning up, whatever. Have you talked about it? Have you talked about, how, what can I do to make the preparation of this easier for you? And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I thought that was just their gig. But now I'm like, I've learned a little bit about the seasoning. And
Right.
that you can see without me verbalizing where my head is going. It's like, okay, so from a sexual standpoint, um, being having these little bit more a lot more open conversations with a partner, um, and also recognizing individually, it's like, what am I doing during the course of the day that seems to be satisfying these urges? I was like, well, would this make my overall relationship more complete if I was able to include my partner? And it might have to change, right?
Yep. Mhm.
Might have, yeah, but I might find that in doing that, uh, it was actually more fulfilling in a longer term because there was a connection,
Yeah.
right? And at the end of the day, isn't that so fascinating? It gets back to connection, right?
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about sports, whether we're talking about other extracurriculars and hobbies or whatever. Sometimes we want to keep it alone, but when we have a connection with someone, it tends to reinforce those moments more deeply. And I certainly would think that having these conversations and these moments of true connection from a sexual standpoint would make the physical need become more of a sort of universal emotional need as well, or fulfill that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, it's all about connection and synchrony and seeing each other as a real human being. I think that theme comes up there as well. And like you just said, like really being attentive with your partner on, how could I create a beautiful experience here? And maybe stepping out of the scripts of, sexuality has to look a certain way. This is what we do, and that's the only way it can be done. And there's some research on great sex versus good sex by Peggy Klein-Platz, and they found that, this really close attention and mindful attention to your partner and really feeling into what they like, what they react to, that's like one of the keys to having beautiful experiences. Really being in tune, really being there. And maybe that means giving them a massage today and not doing the regular stuff,
You're
My
right.
yeah, my definition of sexuality is very broad, to be honest. It's not, yeah. There's many ways we can connect on this level with others.
Yeah.
Not
Right.
every massage is sexual, don't get me wrong, that's not what I'm saying. But there's other ways of being in that world with someone than just the
Yeah. Yeah.
traditional way.
No, I get that. I get that. We've covered a lot, and we
Oh,
we
yeah.
we got into it. We got into the subject that we wondered whether we would talk about, and we have, and I love that we did. Before we wrap up, I want to check back in and say, first of all, is there anything we didn't cover that at least briefly you'd like to kind of give a highlight to? Um, and let's start with that question.
I guess one thing that's still on my mind is after I mentioned the porn use is just I want to point out that porn use is not always problematic. That's not what I was saying. I just want to say that because like what we pointed out in the beginning, that if we start to like judge ourselves harshly for our behaviors, that's, backfiring, and, there's ways in which that can be a constructive experience for people. It's about, when it doesn't feel good anymore, and, and there's maybe more help, more fulfilling ways to experience sexuality. But anyway, that's just a little
No,
note.
no,
No.
I think it's so important to reinforce the non-judgment aspects,
Yeah.
right? As we look at all our behaviors,
Right.
and recognizing that, yeah, there's some behaviors we may eventually want to change, and we want to modify and build new habits,
Mhm.
etc. But the, the way to do this effectively begins from a point of open-mindedness and curiosity and non-judgment. Um, so
Yeah.
I really appreciate you leading that back.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Um, and I just finally, I would just say, as we look at, sort of your life right now,
Mhm.
um, where do you see now sort of mindfulness taking you? And do you have any sense of where your next step is, or how you will keep yourself open to what the next step may be for Dr. Vera Ludwig?
Mhm. Yeah. So for now, I'm busy with this big project. It's planned for a total of 5 years. We're about 1.5 years in. So we're going to finish a model of sexual well being, including these strengths based positive aspects, and then a questionnaire that people can use to measure their sexual well being and work on it. If they would like to. And I think, I guess my next calling that I'm feeling inside is to step out more and, do more work to what we're doing right now. like, like actually get the word out there and give more talks, give more, get to the extent that I can, because it's a lot of work. But yeah, I'm already very busy with the research, so I don't know how much of that I can actually do. But I would love to I want people to actually hear about this, and you know, and I want it to impact their lives. Otherwise, why am I doing this research?
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Um, so would it make sense to direct people to your website to learn more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, so veraludwig.com is the one website. The other one is sexual-wellbeing.org if people are interested in the sexuality aspect. And then the veraludwig.com speaks about like my whole journey and the different strands of research I've been doing, which will maybe at some point intermix even more. And then LinkedIn would be a good one. If you just follow me on LinkedIn, I'll give some updates there. Um, so
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think that's where I found you. And it was, I think, through our mutual connection with Dr. Michael Platt. So I want to shout out to Michael Platt, with whom I have no direct relation, though I like to claim it just like I like to claim a relation to Ben Platt, the actor. There's no connect. But also Justin Brewer suggest people check out his work. The book Craving Mind is seminal. And I want to take this moment right now just to say, Vera, we worked hard to to get this moment together. I am incredibly grateful for your patience and working through this. Also, I just feel I'm blessed for having met you and getting to know you. Look forward to staying connected with you, continuing to learn from you. And I'm just very appreciative of all that you shared today. So blessings to you, Vera.
Oh, thank you so much, Clayton. I mean, you're doing amazing work with this podcast and your weekly sessions, your newsletter. So thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Hey, thanks for listening. I want to give a big shout out to John Gehring of Story Trust Media for his expert editing and wonderful production guidance. I also am deeply grateful for the ongoing support I receive from Meditation for Leadership and their sponsorship. So that's all for now. Until next time, this is Clayton Platt saying, watch for those moments of magic when mindfulness shows up in real time in your life.